Welcome to Sacred Stories, Everyday Lives. I am Adeline St. Clair. Some battles between good and evil are visible. Others unfold quietly, in places where answers are scarce and pain resists explanation. Today's story belongs to the second kind. This is the story of Job. Job is introduced not through struggle, but through steadiness. Scripture describes him as blameless and upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. His life is marked by consistency rather than spectacle. He is faithful, attentive to God, deeply rooted in care for his family and community. This detail is important because the disruption that follows does not come as correction. It does not arrive because Job has failed morally or spiritually. It arrives without explanation. Loss enters his life in waves, relentless and unrelenting. In a single day, messengers arrive one after another with devastating news. Raiders steal his livestock. Fire destroys his sheep. A windstorm collapses the house where his children are gathered, killing all of them. Then, if that was not bad enough, his own body turns against him. Painful sores break out from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. His health deteriorates. His appearance changes so drastically that his friends barely recognize him. Stability is stripped away layer by layer until the life he once knew becomes unrecognizable. And Job does what many of us do at first. He mourns. He tears his robe and shaves his head. These were cultural expressions of devastating grief. He falls to the ground in anguish. He does not pretend this loss is manageable. He does not minimize what has been taken from him. However, he does not curse God. Even with all that has happened to him, he does not abandon faith. Instead, he sits in the ashes and allows himself to feel the full weight of what has happened. And this is where the story becomes even more difficult to understand as a believer. Job's suffering is not paired with immediate meaning. There is no lesson offered at the outset. No reassurance that endurance will be rewarded quickly. No explanation that makes the pain easier to carry. The silence is so profound, and it stretches. Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, arrive to visit. When they first see him, they are so shocked by his condition that they weep aloud. They tear their own robes in solidarity. And then, for 7 days and 7 nights, they do something profound. They sit with him in silence. They do not rush to speak. They do not try to fix what is broken. They simply witness his suffering without trying to explain it away. But eventually, they begin to speak. And this is where another battle emerges. Not between Job and God, but between suffering and interpretation. Job's friends are deeply uncomfortable with pain that has no clear cause. So, they search for reasons. They insist that suffering must be deserved, that pain must indicate wrongdoing, that loss must be the result of hidden sin. They tell Job to examine his life more carefully, to confess whatever he has done wrong, to accept that God is punishing him justly. They attempt to impose order on chaos, to make suffering make sense. But their certainty becomes its own kind of harm. This is how evil often operates. Not always through direct destruction, but through distortion. Through the pressure to explain what should instead be witnessed. Through narratives that protect the comfort of observers at the expense of compassion for the sufferer. However, Job refuses their explanations. He does not claim innocence out of pride or self-righteousness. He claims it out of honesty. He knows that what has happened to him cannot be traced neatly back to moral failure or secret sin. And so, he speaks. Not calmly, not poetically, but truthfully. He questions. He protests. He expresses anguish without packaging it in acceptable spiritual language. He says things like, "Why did I not perish at birth?" and "I loathe my very life." Job's faith does not collapse, but it becomes raw. It becomes exposed in ways that make his friends deeply uncomfortable. Evil does not only exploit suffering through the original loss. It exploits suffering through isolation, through the suggestion that pain disqualifies us from being heard, that doubt makes us unfaithful. If suffering cannot be explained, then it must be silenced. But Job resists that silence. He refuses to pretend that everything is fine. He refuses to confess sins he did not commit, just to give his friends a comfortable narrative. He refuses to accept explanations that do not match his lived reality. And in doing so, he honors something deeper than certainty. He honors truth. Eventually, God responds, but not in the way anyone expects. God does not explain Job's suffering. God does not outline a master plan that suddenly makes the pain understandable. God does not say, "This happened because," or "I allowed this so that." Instead, God speaks from a whirlwind and asks Job a series of questions. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Have you ever given orders to the morning? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? God reminds Job of something deeper than explanation. But the world is larger than his suffering, but not indifferent to it. That mystery does not negate care. That the absence of explanation is not the absence of attention. You see, God does not diminish Job's pain. God does not reduce the complexity of existence to a simple formula where good people prosper and bad people suffer. This is one of the hardest truths in all of Scripture. Sometimes, good does not defeat evil by explaining it. Sometimes, good endures without surrendering. It holds space for both pain and faithfulness to coexist. Job's story does not tell us why suffering happens. It does not provide a theodicy that makes loss acceptable. What it does tell us is how easily suffering can be misused by others, by systems, by certainty masquerading as wisdom. And it tells us that faith does not require understanding to remain intact. Job is eventually restored. His health returns, his family grows, his prosperity is renewed. But that restoration does not erase what happened. It does not make the loss retroactively meaningful. It simply demonstrates that suffering, however inexplicable, is not the final word. In our own lives, suffering often invites commentary, advice, assumptions, expectations to make sense of what hurts, to find the lesson, to identify the purpose. However, Job's story reminds us that pain does not need to justify itself to be real, that grief does not need to be productive to be valid, that sometimes the most faithful response is simply to sit with what is true, even when it cannot be explained. If you are walking through loss that has no explanation, if well-meaning voices have tried to simplify your pain or suggest you must have done something to deserve it, if you have felt pressure to find meaning before you have had space to grieve, this story is for you. It does not offer easy answers. It does not promise that everything happens for a reason. It offers something more valuable: permission. Permission to speak honestly about what hurts. Permission to sit in what is unresolved without rushing toward closure. Permission to trust that goodness can still be presented even when clarity is not. And permission to question without losing faith. The battle between good and evil here is not about victory in the conventional sense. It is about refusing justifications, about holding space for truth when easy explanations would feel safer, but would ultimately be less honest. Job teaches us that faith can be raw and still be real, that lament is a form of trust, that God is large enough to handle our questions and honest enough not to offer false comfort. Thank you for spending this time with me today. May these sacred stories continue to meet you, not with certainty, but with presence. And may you know that your pain does not need to make sense to matter. If this story touched your heart, bless us with a like. Do not be afraid to share this video with someone in your life that may need this message. Share your own experience with us in the comments. Your testimony may help someone else turn to Christ. Subscribe if you would like to hear more stories. New episodes will be shared every Sunday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Do not forget to download our free Bible study for this episode, linked in the description below. Tag us by using hashtag #SSEL Bible Study. Enjoy, and may God bless you. I hope to see you again.